Order.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. Order. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, this House emphatically rejected the Prime Minister's deal. Tonight, the House has... Well, you're too hasty. I've not finished yet. Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days, with barely any notice and an analysis of the economic impact of this bill. The Prime Minister is the author of his own misfortune. So I make this offer to him tonight. Work with us, all of us, to agree a reasonable timetable, and I suspect this House will vote to debate, scrutinise and, I hope, amend the detail of this bill. That would be the sensible way forward, and that's the offer I make on behalf of the opposition tonight.
Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order. Let me say in response, Mr. Speaker, how welcome it is, even joyful, that for the first time in this long saga, this House has actually accepted its responsibilities come together and embraced a deal. I congratulate honourable members across the House on the scale of our collective achievement, because just a few weeks ago hardly anybody believed that we could reopen the withdrawal agreement, let alone abolish the backstop. That is indeed what they were saying. And certainly nobody thought that we could secure the approval of the House for a new deal. And we should not overlook the significance of this moment. And I pay particular tribute to those members of the House who were sceptical and who had difficulties and doubts and who decided to place the national interest ahead of any other consideration. But, Mr. Speaker, I must express my disappointment that the House has again voted for delay, rather than a timetable that would have guaranteed that the UK would be in a position to leave the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And we now face further uncertainty, and the EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay. And the first consequence, Mr. Speaker, is that the government must take the only responsible course and accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome. But secondly, I will speak to EU member states about their intentions until they have reached a decision. Until they've reached a decision, I must say, we will pause this legislation. And let me be clear. Our policy remains that we should not delay, that we should leave the EU on October the 31st, and that is what I will say to the EU, and I will report back to the House. And one way or another, we will leave the EU with this deal to which this House has just given its assent. And I thank members across the House for that hard-won agreement.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I find the response of the Prime Minister quite extraordinary, because the facts of the matter are...
Order. The right honourable gentleman is entitled to raise a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. Let's hear the right honourable member, and then we will expedite progress. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The facts of the matter are this is yet another humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister this evening, who has sought to railroad through this House legislation that requires proper scrutiny. And rightly, this House has spoken with a very clear voice to tell the Prime Minister he is not on. And furthermore, it is absolutely crystal clear what should now happen, because there is legislation passed by this House. It is the law of the land, on the basis of not agreeing a deal, that the Prime Minister is instructed, Prime Minister, to seek an extension. Go to Brussels and do as you have been instructed, and do not put yourself offside against this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is crystal clear that this is a government that has no confidence, but a government that has sought to ignore the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people. It is obvious to us that if we want to guarantee our rights as EU citizens, then Scotland has to become an independent country. And I wonder to that end if you can advise me as to what we must do in this House, both in terms of securing the extension, but also in terms of protecting Scotland's national interest, as to what options are open to us.
To the right honourable gentleman, but I have a sense that his question is largely rhetorical. I say that in no disobliging spirit. I don't think the right honourable gentleman needs my advice, or even if he doesn't need it tonight. And so we'll leave it there for now, and we can't... would the right honourable lady forgive me if I take the point of order from the Father of the House? Oh, well, he's being equally obliging. Equally obliging. No, in that case, very well. Press on. Point of order, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Your decision, Mr. Speaker. I don't think either of us particularly mind. Can I? It is a point of order, almost, Mr. Speaker.
Ask the Father of the House, is it your first, sir?
Can I ask the Prime Minister and everybody else to reconsider the suggestion he made that we pause the progress of the bill tomorrow? I congratulate him on winning approval for the deal he negotiated. I think, said in the House once, I would apologise to him and congratulate him if he actually got it, and he has achieved it. And the second reading vote was the approval of his deal. The argument is how long the House is allowed to take over considering it. I can't quite see the logic of pausing progress on the bill when the whole House is expecting the next 2 days to be spent on it. It would enable us to see how quickly the House is actually proceeding, what sort of time is being looked for, and it may enable then, if people start filibustering, which I hope they won't, for the government to get a majority for a timetable motion if it came back, which was a modest adjustment to the one he had, because I think 3 or 4 days more would certainly do it.
Grateful to the right honourable and learned gentleman, the Father of the House, for his point of order, and I await the development of events, but I think it is not unreasonable for me to say that as of now, unless there's been any change, my understanding, I say to the Father of the House and for the benefit of colleagues, is that the Leader of the House intends, I have a draft copy, to make a business statement which sets out government intentions for the coming days. I say that cautiously in case the government has changed its mind, but I don't think it has changed its mind. I wasn't expecting it to do so. So we will hear from the leader ere long. Meanwhile, point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Twice in the last 3 days, the Prime Minister has failed to force his bad Brexit deal through this House without adequate scrutiny. Without adequate scrutiny. He continues in an irresponsible vein to talk up the prospect of no deal. Is it not time to end the brinksmanship and replace it with some statesmanship, to seriously and respectfully engage with our European friends to secure an extension to Article 50 to enable this House to pass legislation for a people's vote, or if he prefers to have proper scrutiny of his bill, or indeed it may well be for a general election. All of those things require a decent extension to Article 50. He should be a statesman and go and secure it.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady. Do I get the impression that Mr. Nigel Dodds wishes to raise a point of order? Of course. Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say, first of all, on the second reading vote, of course, many honourable members, certainly in my hearing, voted for that second reading, although they were against the contents of the deal and said that they would want to see changes. And it is perfectly proper and right, and the House has made a very wise decision to allow further time for detailed examination of some of the most important legislation that we will ever have to consider, particularly given the impact on Northern Ireland. And at this stage, I would say to the Prime Minister, as he reflects on the votes on Saturday and he studies the votes tonight, that he would sit down with us and talk to us again about what can be done even at this late stage to ensure that we join in this great quest to get Brexit done, but as one United Kingdom.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point of order. Point of order, Mrs Anne Main.
From the Chair that this second reading has been passed with a significant majority, because the leader of the Liberal Democrats and the leader of the SNP keep saying it has not been passed. Can the Chair clarify that the second reading was passed with a majority?
That is undeniably true. That is undeniably true. I'm not sure that my clarification was required, certainly not for members, but nevertheless, for the benefit of those observing our proceedings, the honourable lady's got a very fair point. It is important to be clear. The second reading of the bill was carried, as I announced, by 329 votes to 299. It was the programme motion that was defeated by 322 to 308. So that is by way of being a public service broadcast. Yes, very well. Yes. Point of order, Lucy Powell. Yes, I will come to the honourable lady whom I saw afterwards. But point of order, Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wondered if you could clarify for us how getting Brexit done sits with pausing Brexit, because this feels like a very churlish reaction to what is a straightforward request, which is this House just have a short amount of time. Do those two things equate in your mind, Mr. Speaker?
Grateful to the honourable lady for her point of order. I think the fairest thing I can say to the honourable lady is this, and it's a factual point of which the leader and I'm sure the Prime Minister will be aware. As a result of the fact that the programme motion was turned out, and it's very encouraging, the former Government Chief Whip is nodding vigorously, we could not proceed, I must advise the House, we could not proceed with the start of committee consideration for which there is currently no authority. So, if I may say so, people are entitled to their own views about the attitude of one leader or another, but I certainly am not going to make any charge of churlishness at all. I think, to be fair, the Prime Minister is in pragmatic fashion accepting the immediate implications of the result. And it is literally a time to pause and consider how to proceed. I make no other point beyond that, but it's encouraging that I think Sir Patrick McLaughlin, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, can you confirm that what the Prime Minister has done tonight, he had actually no other alternative? Because under the last Labour government, they passed timetabling motions, which meant bills had to have a timetabling motion for them to carry on. Therefore, the action of members tonight to vote against the timetable motion means that we can't continue with the business as we used to be able to until the changes were made by the last Labour government.
That's right,
I don't think the right honourable gentleman requires my endorsement. Suffice it to say that a book could be written on the subject of the genesis of programme motions, and it may well be the right honourable gentleman is tempted to pen it, though whether it would prove to be a bestseller is another matter. If the right honourable lady gentleman will forgive me, I'll come first of all to the honourable lady whom I've kept waiting. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts. And then...
Could he explain to me, and I'm sure to people outside, now that the government has chosen to pause legislation, and by doing that, to extend the Brexit process?
Order. I accept that feelings are running high, but the honourable lady must be heard. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
The government will appreciate, and people outside, that there is now more opportunity to release the economic impact assessments, which we should all have sight of before we make such material decisions.
Before the honourable lady makes her own point in her own way, and it requires no comment from me, but I thank her for saying what she said. I will come to the right honourable lady. Point of order, the Father of the House.
I'm grateful for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. Would it be in order for the House to adjourn for an hour so that the Leader of the House could come back with an amended timetable motion to put to the House with its approval?
No. Be inclined to accept that without notice. And what I would say to the right honourable and learned gentleman is that it would be potentially orderly, but I have, if he'll forgive me saying so, to read the runes. And I have no sense, notwithstanding the argument that he has advanced, that that is the wish of the government. The fact that the Prime Minister has just exited the chamber it seems to me rather to reinforce that view. I make no criticism at all. I'm simply saying he's left the chamber. I don't think he has any appetite for the preference of the right honourable and learned gentleman, which I hope he can bear with stoically and with fortitude. And if the leader wanted to do that, he'd have said so, and he hasn't, so he doesn't. And point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the leader of the opposition got up and made an offer to the party opposite to have a proper discussion about having a different programme motion, which would have given us more time for the release of things like impact assessments and more time to discuss what's a very complex and important bill. This, Mr. Speaker, has not been addressed, and whilst it's correct that we can't proceed tonight, it is the case, surely, if there was an agreement between the front benchers, that we could re-establish a timetable and look and scrutinise this bill properly if we didn't have a Prime Minister that was behaving like a two-year-old and playing silly games.
I note what the right honourable lady has said. The position is as I have explained, and colleagues will understand that senior figures in this place anticipate different scenarios, and it's not uncommon for them to communicate those to the chair, members on both sides of the House, and the leader did me the courtesy of informing me in advance of what the government's attitude would be in the event of a particular result, and he has not departed from that view. So I'm telling the House what the government's current intention is, about which colleagues will hear more in the business statement. That is very much a matter for the government, and I'm not trying to choke off what the right honourable lady wants. I'm simply telling her we are where we are as things stand. The orderly thing, colleagues, forgive me, the orderly thing to do at this point is simply to proceed with what would be the choreography. I think I have a sense of how it's going to proceed, but with, in the first instance, the money resolution to be moved formally.
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. Ways and Means resolution to be moved formally.
Not moved.
Thank you. Not moved. Colleagues, we come now to a series of motions, and I think number 9, 7, 8 and 19. Yes. And if I may suggest it, we will take number 6 first. Motion number 6, the whip to move, executing the European Union, brackets, gas, close brackets.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order papers. Members of that have been say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 7, exiting the European Union, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order papers. Members of that have been say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No.
The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 8, exiting the European Union, brackets, auditors, close brackets, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, members of the other opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Very well. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 9, exiting the European Union, brackets, sea fisheries, close brackets, whip to move.
I beg to move.
Sorry?
Agriculture.
I do beg your pardon. You're entirely correct. Agriculture. Yes, indeed. Number 9.
Beg to move.
Yeah, he still begs to move, and that's helpful. The question is, as on the order papers, most of them say aye. Aye. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 and 18. Up to 18. Yes. With the leave of the House, I propose to take motions 10 to 18 together. 10 to 18 together. Colleagues can see what they are if they look. The whip to move. The question is, as on the order paper, in respect of motions 10 to 18 inclusive. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 19, exiting the European Union, brackets, financial services, close brackets, whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 20 on legal aid and advice. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, members of the opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. I think we come out of business. Motion number 21 on business of the House. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, members of the opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We come now to petitions.
If the statement isn't stated.
Sorry? Well, we will. Yeah, okay, we'll take the business statement first. Yes, very well. Yeah. Which will have a bigger audience than the petition. Lord President of the Council and Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'm petitioning to make another statement. Because of the loss of the programme motion, I have to make a statement because the bill now stands referred to a committee under Standing Order 83A and Standing Order 63, and I mention that for the convenience of the House. Therefore, I have no option but to make a business statement, as we could not have continued with the business previously set out for tomorrow. Therefore, tomorrow, the 23rd of October, there will be the continuation of the debate on the Queen's speech on the NHS. On Thursday, the 24th of October, there will be conclusion of the debate on the Queen's speech on the economy, and on Friday, the 25th of October, the House will not be sitting.
The Shadow Leader of the House, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement, which is as a business statement and not a point of order. But can I also say to the Leader of the House that he heard Her Majesty's opposition, and he will know that we on this side of the House stand ready to work with the government, and I know the Chief Whip is on our side. He's a very reasonable person and will be very happy to discuss through the usual channels a proper way that we can proceed. Mr. Speaker, this is important because it was only earlier this week that the Secretary of State for exiting the Union wasn't clear on what the tariffs were going from Northern Ireland to GB and GB to Northern Ireland. But as my honourable friend, the member for North Belfast, I think that's correct. My honourable friend from North Belfast has made it clear this is really important for the Union. So I'm obviously disappointed, Mr. Speaker, as are the rest of the right honourable and honourable members who have prepared the Queen's speech. This is no way to conduct business. We have been moved around, jerked around, quite frankly, by this government in the shambolic way. This is not done in an orderly fashion, and we now have the votes on the Queen's speech on the Thursday. I'd be grateful if the Leader could clarify if there'll be votes on Wednesday and Thursday.
Well, just before I call other colleagues, I think it should be pretty clear, and I thought it emerged in the course of points of order and my responses to them, but just in case there is any doubt, the technical term for the status of the bill at present is that the bill is in limbo. That is the technical term advised to me by the clerks, and I would refer members to the ruling of the Chair on the 10th of July 2012 and paragraph 28.58 of Erskine May. Any motion to enable the bill to proceed to committee stage or beyond requires notice and so will be considered on another day. So one could have had an indication of intent, but there does exist a requirement for notice. That, I think, pretty well completes the picture, but I will, at this point, take the... I beg your pardon. Oh, indeed, the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm fascinated to hear that the bill is in limbo, because I think, theologically speaking, it was reported that Pope Benedict XVI abolished limbo. So I do wonder whether the bill is not in the heaven that is having been passed, nor in the hell of having failed, but is in purgatory, where it is suffering the pains of those in purgatory. To reply to the Right Honourable Lady, I think original sin is beyond the immediate competence of my answer on this statement. To reply to the Right Honourable Lady, discussions always take place between whips' offices, as is well known. The difficulty was that the opposition wanted the debate to continue past the 31st of October, which is the deadline for leaving the European Union. I would like to correct her on the issue relating to tariffs, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, he did not say anything about tariffs. It was not a tariff issue. There are no tariffs between GB and Northern Ireland. With the issue, forms and tariffs are completely different things. I'm so sorry that the opposition is confused. After so many years of debate on this subject between a form and a tariff, we can put on, no doubt, specialist expertise to explain the difference. As regards the interruption of the Queen's speech, first of all, Mr. Speaker, this has a wonderful historic tradition, which is why we always take the Outlaws Bill, first reading, immediately after the Queen's speech, as a sign that this House is allowed to debate what it chooses to debate and is not there to oblige the Crown. But perhaps more relevantly, under this circumstance, there is the deadline of the 31st of October, and we on this side of the House are trying to meet that deadline by getting a deal through. The House has voted for that deal, but it seems to will the end but not the means currently.
Thank you. Yeah, no. Yes. The Honourable Gentleman is not in a classroom. He doesn't have to raise his hand in that way. Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend that given everything else, they clearly must have an understanding in government of where there is the limit beyond which it will not be possible to go with this bill with regards to leaving by the 31st and completing its progress. So in that light, has my right honourable friend kept in reserve the consideration that it may be possible for this House to sit through the weekend if necessary, and, if necessary, round the clock to achieve whatever is required to meet that deadline of the 31st?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. The problem, the constraint is, of course, that this is a bicameral legislature, and however long we sat, the House of Lords also has to sit, and the deadline is Thursday week. And therefore, I think even if we were to sit round the clock, having lost the hours that we would have had today, with the time required for the House of Lords, there is now very, very little time left, and after people have complained that the time is insufficient, it might be peculiar if they were then to say that even shorter time were sufficient. So I very much welcome the intent of my right honourable friend's question, but I don't think that will work.
Speak Wisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for his short business statement this evening. And he's absolutely right. He has met his obligations according to standing orders of the House for making a statement. And can I just say, can I thank him for not doing it through a point of order as he did on Saturday. And he's done the right thing by addressing this House with a business statement where we could question him about certain issues about what he's just said. And on that, and I listened very carefully to the Leader of the House, He's described the current bill, the withdrawal agreement bill, as in limbo. I was hearing from the Prime Minister, and I think several journalists throughout the whole of the gallery were being briefed today that the Prime Minister was prepared to withdraw the withdrawal agreement bill if this programme motion went through. That was a very clear statement that was made by the Prime Minister. So I'd like the Leader of the House to clarify this limbo that he describes. When are we likely to see the withdrawal agreement in front of the House again? And I'll remind them that the 31st is next Thursday. There's a commitment by this Prime Minister to adhere by the Ben Act to seek that extension. I think the Leader of the House has to describe a little bit more how these competing tensions will be met. Now, obviously, it's the Queen's speech that comes back, and that's right too. And I congratulate the Leader of the House for putting this forward. It's right that the House properly considers the Queen's speech and has an opportunity to vote on this. But we need to know what's happening beyond this. There is only 1 week until this deadline, this self-imposed deadline by the Prime Minister is reached. What is going to happen?
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hate to quibble with the honourable gentleman, but it is not a self-imposed deadline. It is a deadline that was selected by the European Union. Honourable and right honourable members may recall that the previous government went to the European Union suggesting a deadline around June. This was rejected by the EU, which set a deadline of the 31st of October. In a remarkably short space of time, my right honourable friend renegotiated the deal, which almost everybody said was impossible, and the deadline has remained fixed. The honourable gentleman raises the question of limbo and how that correlates with my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's reference to the bill being withdrawn. Well, the key thing to remember about limbo, Mr. Speaker, is that to enter limbo you cannot still be alive, and therefore the bill is no longer a live bill.
Yes. Oh, we are wallowing in the realms of metaphysical abstraction, as Burke would have said, and almost certainly did, albeit not in relation to this bill. Very enjoyable. Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge my right honourable friend to reconsider the point made by our right honourable friend, the member for Chingford? I think we all know that the people who voted against the programme motion tonight didn't really want more time to consider the bill. They wanted to frustrate Brexit. They wanted to block Brexit. Everybody knows what. Nobody's fooled by that. No. And so why doesn't the government actually play them at their own game? The Father of the House said another 3 days would do it. So why don't we start with the committee stage tomorrow? And the extra 3 days that seem to be required can be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where we can sit till any hour on all 3 days, and we can see how much appetite there really is for extra scrutiny of the bill, because I suspect if he was to do that, he'd find that actually there wouldn't be much scrutiny required from the benches opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for a characteristically good idea as to how we might be able to proceed. The only difficulty is that the programme motion has been voted down, and to sit in the way that my honourable friend suggests would require another programme motion, and there is no indication that that would meet with greater satisfaction from the opposition, and the House of Lords also has to consider this bill in due time, so I fear that his great solution is not going to be a way forward.
Dame Margaret Beckett.
Mr. Speaker, I had not intended to seek to intervene on this exchange, but I am so offended by the remarks of the honourable member who spoke a few moments ago that I feel inclined to do so. It is not the truth. It is, in fact, something which we are only allowed to call a terminological inexactitude. In other words, it is absolute rubbish to suggest that people who voted against this programme motion only did so in order to delay Brexit or because they are opposed to Brexit. Any honourable member who understands their duties in this place should never have voted for this programme motion in the first place. And I'd say further, and the right honourable gentleman who is the former leader of the Conservative Party, the member for Chingford, is equally at fault in not understanding when the sensible thing to do is to accept with good grace the very generous and sensible offer immediately made by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition. And finally, on the question of limbo, I rather thought you had to be pure of soul to get into it, so not many people are going to end up there.
Mr. Speaker,
don't even try.
I think the original understanding of limbo, one that is no longer widely accepted, is that it was a place for the souls of the unbaptized and for those who died before salvation was brought to us at the point of the resurrection. But I think the understanding now is that that is rather a narrow interpretation. I think the issue of what motivates people to vote in this House is one that it is always very difficult to settle. I have always accepted that honourable and right honourable members in this House want what is best for their country, but think that there are different ways to do it. But you must draw conclusions, Mr. Speaker, from people's actions. Yes. And I do not think it is unreasonable to conclude that people who voted against the second reading of this bill and against the programme motion are not the greatest admirers of the proposals towards Brexit.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, in the exchange that the leader and I had yesterday, I said, and he agreed with me, that if people voted against the programme motion, they would have blocked Brexit. Now, they have indeed done that for a period, and that is a fact. The question in front of all of us is whether they have blocked Brexit permanently, and that is something I think we should deal with. I'm grateful for those members who've taken difficult personal decisions on behalf of their constituents to vote for second reading of the bill, and I would urge my right honourable friend and the Treasury bench to think about ways in which we can deliver Brexit on the 31st of October, to get it done, whilst allowing the House more time to debate it, to see whether those two things can be reconciled. And I note, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, that the Opposition Chief Whip did make an offer along those lines this afternoon, and it's something I think worthy of at least some consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is hard to see how the time could have been divided up otherwise. And my right honourable friend mentions the commitment to leave on the 31st of October and says that people may have voted to obstruct Brexit. They may find that all they voted for is for us to leave without a deal.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, it is a bit rich, actually, the Leader of the House, having prorogued Parliament and broken the law to do so, to now complain about a lack of time. But having said that, he has had an offer from the opposition benches to enter into negotiations to set out a timetable for proper scrutiny of this legislation. Now, if he was listening this afternoon, he would have heard many members on this side who said they were going to support the Prime Minister today, but they wanted more scrutiny of the bill. Now, he is arrogantly now taking those votes and saying we've got to go on the 31st, away with all your desire to have further scrutiny. That is not a reasonable position for the government to take. So now will he listen to Parliament for a change and go away and speak to through the usual channels and set out a timetable motion for proper scrutiny of this bill? That is what the House is asking for.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. He says I prorogued Parliament. There are two problems with that. One is it is above and beyond my authority, Mr. Speaker, to have done such a thing. But also, had he listened to the ruling of the Supreme Court, he would have discovered that Parliament was not, in fact, prorogued, and therefore, whether I'd done it or not, nothing had come of it. The Supreme Court said that the piece of paper read out proroguing Parliament was as a blank sheet of paper. So that is, I fear, erroneous. As to his second point, I don't want to be pedantic or to quibble, but we have had 3.5 years. Somebody's got an important call. I'm sorry, it's interrupting personal business. But that we have had 3.5 years going over all of this. We have had hours and hours of debate. We need to come to a conclusion. The deadline for the conclusion was set by the European Union. I'm sure the Right Honourable Lady will be called by Mr. Speaker, if only she's patient, that we have had plenty of debate, but ultimately a decision needs to be made.
Mr. Owen Paterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend like to reflect that we've just gone through a second reading of an extraordinarily important bill, and you, Mr. Speaker, set limits of 4 minutes on backbenchers, and lo and behold, the Labour Party couldn't put up enough speakers in the last hour. So would my right honourable friend like to reflect that the Labour Party have made an offer, the opposition have made an offer, he should take it up. because I don't think they have the skills and the numbers to talk through the night, as suggested by my right honourable friend from Chingford and Woodford Green, and I think he might get a very pleasant surprise that these proceedings dry up much earlier than he's expecting, and we do reach the Elysian Fields on the 31st of October.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend makes an intriguing suggestion. Far be it from me to say that members opposite wouldn't be able to speak at considerable length. One of the skills of many politicians is to be able to speak at considerable, some might say inordinate length, though I do note that one of the great experts and exponents of this, my honourable friend the member for Shipley, is in the chamber, whose eloquence knows no bounds and entertains us all greatly on Fridays.
My earliest recollection of the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for North Shropshire speaking in the chamber was an occasion upon which he had to wait rather longer than he wanted to do so to ask a question. He was eventually called by Madam Speaker, and at the end of his question, it's only 20 years ago, so I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman remembers, Madam Speaker Boothroyd turned to the Right Honourable Gentleman, which he wasn't then, he was just an honourable gentleman, and said, "Now, Mr. Patterson, I hope you're satisfied." Lady Herman.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker. Since the withdrawal bill has huge consequences for the people in Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland Assembly is still not sitting, I wonder if the Leader of the House could enlighten us about the steps that the government is now going to take to ask all the political parties in Northern Ireland about their reaction to the fact that this bill has received its second reading this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady obviously raises an important point, and everybody in the government wishes to see the Assembly brought back together, and the consequences of not having Assembly have been complicated for Northern Ireland in the Brexit process. I am reluctant, however, to trespass on the territory of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and the Honourable Lady tempts me, but I think she will get a better answer from my right honourable friend than she will get from me, so I hope she will forgive me, and I will ask her to raise that with him. But if it would be helpful, I will certainly seek a written response for her from him. But may I reiterate what I said in my last business statement, that this government takes the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland not only seriously, but as a fundamental statement of what our nation is, and will do everything it can to support the United Kingdom.
Sir Desmond Sway.
I hate to be a pedant, but my recollection is that the souls of the upright and pure who preceded salvation actually ended up in Dante's first circle. The events of this evening prove to us all that actually we're all much further down in hell already.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very reluctant to quibble with my right honourable friend, but Dante cannot always be relied on for the theology of the Catholic Church.
You Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a new pupil, I believe now we're back to the Queen's speech, so maybe the Speaker can help us, or the House can help us, by telling us which amendment is going to be used, like Amendment B for the TV licence.
Mr. Speaker, fortunately, the matter of selecting amendments doesn't fall to me, it falls to wiser heads.
Well, I don't know whether the heads are wiser, but the heads are different, and it might be helpful to the honourable gentleman if I explain, and as the leader knows, and many members know, but some members don't, that that selection is made on the day of the business. And I can say to the honourable gentleman, the selection will be announced to the House. So he can't know it now, because it hasn't been made, but he will know it when he needs to know it. Thank you. Point of order, Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by saying how delighted I am that finally, after over 3 years, there is a deal that the majority in this House has supported. And because many people outside this House will be confused, it's clear that we couldn't have voted on the deal before the deal was agreed. And it was only agreed on Friday. On Saturday, it was sidetracked by an amendment. Yesterday, it was sidetracked by the rules of procedure. Today, the deal went through with the majority, but now the timetable is sidetracked again. As somebody who wants to see a deal can I urge the Leader of the House? I don't know if he's a Harry Potter fan, but I am. And the great Hermione Granger, of course, in challenging times, used a time turner. Can he work with all parties, especially those in Europe, to see how we can get this deal over the line as quickly as possible?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suppose we could repeal the Act that put us on the Gregorian rather than Julian calendar, which might buy us a few extra days.
Go Snell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't hope to match the wit of Dante or the knowledge of Harry Potter, but if I could suggest that Monty Python could come in, that the injury inflicted this evening was a mere flesh wound. And if the Leader of the House was willing to bring forward a motion tomorrow with a more considered timetable for committee stage, it would pass this House. And just to correct the point that was made by the member for Shipley, who is no longer in his place, some of us voted for second reading precisely so we could get on to the next stage for more scrutiny, and didn't support the programme motion because we did not believe there was sufficient time. There is clearly a goodwill in this House now to progress this bill to a point of conclusion, but to do so we need the appropriate time, and I would urge the Leader of the House to consider that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his point and for his very reasonable suggestion as to his own motives for voting. I quite understand that there is a conflict sometimes between wanting something to happen and feeling that the procedures for it are unduly truncated. I am a great believer that time in this House should be used for legislation. I think that is our primary purpose, and I rather have a hankering for the 19th century timetabling when we were able to go on at considerable length and weren't reduced to 4-minute speeches. However, there is a pressing deadline of the 31st of October, and this is where I have parted company with the honourable gentleman, because I feel it is very urgent to get it through by then.
Thank you. Mr. Peterborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on the selection of Queen's Speech amendments, I remember you very helpfully selected one in the name of John Barron previously. Leader of the House, can we interpret from what you are saying that it is now impossible to get the deal through this House and the other House prior to the 31st of October, and in that case it is effectively dead for approval before that date?
Mr. Speaker, impossible is a very strong word, but it is very hard to see how it is possible. But whilst answering the honourable gentleman, may I say I hope you had an enjoyable Saturday, and it was more enjoyable after the House had risen than before.
Point of order, not point of order, a question to the Leader of the House, Ruth Smith.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm yet to do my first point of order. Today, many people on this side of the House walked through and voted for a second reading. All we're asking for is the opportunity to ensure that the deal that was only presented to us last night works for our constituents and works for my local economy. We need slightly more time. I urge the Leader of the House to find more time so that I can do my job, scrutinise properly and make sure that I deliver Brexit in a way that works for the posheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I encourage the honourable lady to make a point of order? First of all, they're a very good way of getting in when it otherwise would be disorderly. But secondly, if she were able to make one that is a real point of order, that would be almost historic. I think there have been very few in your 10 years in the chair, or almost none. But may I also congratulate her on her service to her constituents and for standing up for what they voted for, and her courage in doing so, because as somebody who did, when on the backbenches, occasionally break the whip, it is not the easiest thing to do, and people do it because they believe very strongly in the rightness of what they are voting for. So I thank her for that. And I am not unsympathetic to the point about time. It is simply the deadline of the 31st of October, which was set by the European Union, and therefore we are compressed in the time available to get this bill delivered, which is why I was willing to support the programme motion and felt that it was reasonable under the circumstances.
Mr. Marcus Fish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend consider it in order for the opposition chief whip, given that he is sitting there, to actually tell the House, how long exactly the opposition would like to discuss this, or is it just all about delay?
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend and Somerset neighbour raises an intriguing prospect that points of order should be determined by me. Should the House wish to do this, it could of course change standing orders and it could be delegated to the Leader of the House. But I think, Mr. Speaker, you might not be entirely happy with that, so I fear I cannot answer my honourable friend in the way he might like.
Not least on account of my concern for my successor, rather than for any particular concern on my own part, in the light of the announcement that I made a few weeks ago. But the right honourable gentleman's surmise is correct. Well, I will say bless whoever that was. Ah, it's the honourable lady. Yes, bless you. Point of order, Chris Leslie.
Question, Mr. Speaker, to the Leader of the House as part of the business statement. I want to know if he would actually listen to lots of the voices from different perspectives on the Brexit question, who are all a bit puzzled as to why the Leader of the House and the Prime Minister have chosen not to enter into a continuing of the committee stage tomorrow or on Thursday, which would be perfectly in order for the Leader of the House and the Prime Minister to have scheduled, either by putting down and laying those motions this evening or at the first beginning of business tomorrow. It is very notable, Mr. Speaker, and I think a lot of people, there's a jovial atmosphere this evening, but a lot of people are very frustrated, not least because I've got some amendments which are first up in that committee stage whenever it actually occurs, who believe that it's the choice of the Leader of the House, it's the choice of the Prime Minister not to be progressing this bill tomorrow or on Thursday. They are therefore the architects of their own fate in this regard, and forevermore we will be able to say, when people say why perhaps didn't this bill make progress before the 31st of October, it was his own doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to listen to the honourable gentleman's dulcet tones, which we had the joy of doing last night at considerable length. And I am sorry that his amendments are not going to be debated now, and that instead honourable and right honourable members have to listen to me. Had he voted for the programme motion, he would have found that his amendments were being debated. However, I think the honourable gentleman who talks much about listening did not listen to my opening comments about the interaction of standing orders on the business that we had before us today. Under Standing Order 83A, if a programme motion is lost that commits a bill to the floor of the House, that bill is then committed to a committee, and we would have to have another resolution to pull it out of committee. So it is not possible just to proceed tomorrow as if nothing had happened.
I'm advised by the clerk at the table that it's not committed to a committee. It stands in limbo. But in practical terms, so far as tonight is concerned, worry not, because it matters not, because it doesn't make any practical difference. But that point can always be discussed afterwards if it takes the fancy of colleagues. Yes, Mr. Charlie Elphick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my right honourable friend not struck by the irony that those who voted against the programme motion in the hope of cancelling Brexit have in fact made a no-deal departure, which they supposedly fear, much more likely? And would he not agree with me that a deal departure is more preferable? And would he bring forward a programme motion tomorrow for the House to sit for as long as it takes, all through the night if necessary? Even if the party opposite want to knock off early, we should be able to carry on and make sure that we get this through and get out and get on with other stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the point that he is raising, but we have already gone through this. We would need a further programme motion if we were to sit through the night, and it seems unlikely that it would be possible to get a programme motion through when we have failed to get this programme motion through.
Thank you. And Lucy Powell.
Perhaps I could offer some advice to the Leader of the House in the spirit that it's intended. Many of us on this side of the House share his frustration that we can't proceed and get to some votes and start to see how this land lies. But the issue here, I think particularly, was the short amount of time for committee stage. I don't see why we needed a whole day for third reading. We could have a lot longer on committee stage, and he could bring forward tomorrow morning a fresh programme motion that allows for longer in committee for us to actually put amendments in a timely fashion. If you want some assistance with a Gantt chart, I'm always here. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility to find a time that would suffice, and we would vote for a programme motion tomorrow morning on that basis.
Mr. Speaker, we've already lost the 3 hours that we would have had today in committee, and we had 12 hours set aside for committee tomorrow. And Thursday would have been both for report stage and for third reading, not just for the committee stage, and it is important to have time available for report stage to consider further amendments that may be made, and it would be highly unusual to truncate the report stage so much and hand it all over to committee.
Wayne David.
Given that the Prime Minister decided to obey the law and apply for an extension from the European Union, if the European Union were to grant an extension, will the Leader of the House commit to coming back here and putting forward a new programme motion so that there could be adequate consideration of the bill?
Leader of the House.
The Prime Minister has passed on Parliament's request for an extension. The Prime Minister has not signed that request, and I do not believe it is the Prime Minister's request. It is Parliament's request for an extension, and one that I think is a great error.
Absolutely right. Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What would persuade the government to consider bringing forward a new business motion?
Mr. Speaker, it seems there's no point in bringing forward a new business motion because this one has been defeated, and the time that there would have been for debating this issue has now been truncated because instead of getting on to it now with this committee stage, we are in fact having this business statement.
Thank you. That concludes the exchanges. Oh, very well. On the business statement, I'm grateful to the Leader of the House for the information that he's proffered. Point of order, Mr. Clive Efford.
Seeking clarification from you, Mr. Speaker, of what the term limbo means, because the Leader of the House has told us that the bill is dead. And from that, you read that it can't be resurrected in any way for a future business statement that can send it into committee and that the House can deal with it. So can you clarify that for us, Mr. Speaker?
If I may say so, I think the accurate characterisation is that the bill is not dead, but it is inert. It is not on a journey, it is not progressing, it is not moving from one place to another. It is inert, or alternatively it might be said to be static. But it is not a corpse. Is that adequate for the honourable gentleman? And I know that the clerk at the table would consult her scholarly cranium on this matter, and if I had urged, she would advise me that I had done, but she hasn't, so I haven't. Oh, very well. Yes, point of order, Hugh Gaffney.
Mr. Speaker, just a clarification before the Leader leaves the House. He just mentioned something. He just mentioned something very important there about the signature of Boris, the Prime Minister, to the EU. The Leader of the House just mentioned that. Can he make that point clear, what he just made? His last statement.
Very happy to oblige. It's not my responsibility to explain or communicate government actions, but I think that this matter has been covered in the media, and I think all the Leader was saying was that he didn't believe that this was the government's request for an extension, it was Parliament's request for an extension, and the Prime Minister has sent a number of letters to the European Union. The one specifically relating to the request for the extension was not signed by the Prime Minister, and I'm sure that that was a conscious decision on his part, and people have expressed their views about that matter, but I certainly don't wish to add to any controversy about that matter. I have no wish to add to any controversy about that matter. The simple fact is that the request for the extension has been submitted, and I don't want to cavil at what the Leader said. It is, in a sense, Parliament's request, and, you know, I don't want to conduct an argument about that. It's not necessary, but I hope that that's helpful to the honourable gentleman. Parliament did want the extension, the government didn't. Parliament voted for the extension, so the government passed it on as Parliament's wish. Yes, very well. Point of order, Mr. Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do hope this is a point of order. Clearly, the House, by virtue of those that voted for the government's programme motion and those of us that didn't but have expressed our desire to see committee stage, the House wishes to move to committee stage. Can you advise me if there is any procedure available to individual members or the House as a whole that could take committee stage forward, even if the Leader of the House is resistant to doing so?
Well, I think that is, at this point, hard to envisage. I won't say that there is no means by which that can be done. We have seen in recent times how the House can take ownership of matters, including of the paper, if I can put it that way, of the order paper, and to schedule business, including leading to legislation. So I don't say that there is no way that anything could be done, but I surmise from what's been said that at present the government's thinking is, as the Leader has explained, and the opposition's thinking is, as has been outlined by the Shadow Leader, the supporting evidence for which is the point of order by the Leader of the Opposition and the apparent conversations between the usual channels, that is to say, between the Opposition Whip's office and the Government Whip's office. I think it is probably prudent and seemly to leave it there at this stage, though I appreciate the fertile and vivid imagination of the honourable gentleman, which may avail the House at a later stage. If there are no further points of order, we come now to the petition. Mr. Ian Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my job to stand up for the people of Dudley, so I rise to present a petition signed by 1,500 residents demanding Dudley Council and the developers it's working with finally get Cavendish House demolished and get on with the redevelopment of this part of the town centre. Cavendish House has stood empty for decades, it's been vandalised and it's dangerous, it presents a terrible image of the town and it's delaying and deterring investment. We want the council and the developers to get on with the demolition so the site can be regenerated with the new shops and leisure facilities we've been promised for so many years. I'm really grateful to local residents like Sarah and Simon Townend and Gordon Laird, and to the staff and customers at businesses like the Arcade Cafe and Gather for helping collect so many names for our petition, and it's a privilege to present it on behalf of the people of Dudley. The petition states that the petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government to press upon Dudley Council's Planning Committee the need to pull down Cavendish House Tower Block to improve the appearance of Dudley Town Centre, and the petitioners remain, etc.
Yeah. Well, he's practised that look.
Petition Cavendish House in Dudley Town Centre.
Thank you. Petition, Mr. Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to present the petition of registered members of the Wickham Islamic Mission and Mosque Trust, High Wycombe. In May, I was approached by a member of the largest High Wycombe mosque who was rightly concerned about its governance. This evening, I'd like to present a petition on behalf of 1,095 members of the Wickham Islamic Mission and Mosque Trust. The Mosque Trust has approximately 9,000 members. It's one of the largest and most important, most valued voluntary organisations in the town of High Wycombe. I do not wish to tell members of the mosque how to run their affairs, but charitable status means the Management Committee's conduct is open to scrutiny. The petition asks the Charity Commission to oversee a general meeting of members and long overdue elections to the Management Committee at the earliest opportunity. Perhaps, like this House, some members fear losing. Although the details were never made public, I understand within the last 2 years a retired judge gave direction to the Management Committee on how it should conduct itself and the need to comply with charity law. Other informal petitions have been organised by members. Recently, 2,000 members of the Trust asked the Management Committee to hold elections. None have been announced. There are serious allegations of improper conduct contained in the petition. and the petitioners therefore request the House of Commons hears their grievance and requests that the House of Commons urges the Minister responsible for charities to instruct the Charity Commission to oversee a general meeting of members and elections to the Management Committee at the earliest opportunity, and the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition Wickham Islamic Mission and Mosque Trust elections.
Order. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.